Hi everyone, I'm back with another film review, and this week it's The Incredible Us, the sophomore outing by Jordan Peele, who wrote and directed Get Out, and he's back with his latest horror film. Yeah, it's a horror film, but I think it's doing a lot more than that. So we're going to do our usual thing. I'm going to say whether you should see it, whether you should see it in the cinema. Then we'll talk a little bit about the film, then we'll have a break, and then most of the conversation will be in spoilers. Not so much spoiling the film, but trying to understand this film, because, man, this is just layer upon layer upon layer, and it's one of those films which I think in a lot of ways is better, having that coffee after seeing a film or a beer and discussing with your friends. So should you see it in the cinema? Well, I would definitely say you should. But having said that, if horror isn't your thing, and if you really don't want to be part of this conversation, like if you're not into film conversation, then you could probably leave it to DVD or cable. But I think if you're probably listening to me and watching my show, you're probably enough into film and pop culture that you want to be knowing what's happening. And in that case, you should go see Us. And the sooner the better, and without knowing anything, because you will enjoy it a lot more. Okay, I'll be back in a second and we'll get into this film. Okay, so this part we're going to just talk about the film generally without ruining it. And look, I'm going to keep this relatively short. The film is being criticised, and I think rightly so, for plot versus theme. And we'll get into that a lot more in spoilers. But what I mean by that is the plot, this is a lot more ambitious than Get Out. So Get Out was quite contained, so it could have quite a neat ending, although I thought it was the best film I saw in 2017. This film is a lot more ambitious, so once it breaks out from its initial concept, it then gets a little bit messy. And you are left going, how would that really work? But when you think about it metaphorically, I think it really says a lot. So it's Jordan Peele, and if you know Jordan Peele, he was part of, a comedy duo. He's then done Get Out, he's done other things. He's about to do Twilight Zone in America, the new reimagining of it. And this is pretty much based on a famous Twilight Zone episode called, I think, Mirror All, or Mirror Image, that's right, in which, someone sees a mirror image of them and then is haunted by a doppelganger. Well, in this film, it starts off where this family, there's a lot of tension, for this lady, Adelaide, played by Lupita Nyong'o, who has had an incident when she was a kid and doesn't want to go back. She's kind of got traumatic syndrome and doesn't want to go back to this beach where it happened, but she does, and they go back to their family home. And then during the night, 4 doppelgangers turn up who are her family reflected. And then it goes on from there. And it's pretty much, for the first half of the film, pretty much just textbook horror film. But pretty much you start to realize Jordan Peele's saying a lot. So the cast is fantastic. I'll read it out because the kids are great and I really didn't know them. So Lupita Nyong'o, look, before we move on to the cast, Lupita Nyong'o, everyone plays 2 roles. So you are who you are in the real world. Lupita Nyong'o plays Adelaide, but her doppelganger is called Red. So everyone has to do all this dual acting, and Lupita Nyong'o is just absolutely brilliant. And although I've always thought she's a good actress, she hasn't had that many. This is, I think, her first lead role that I remember. It's mainly she's been in supporting roles and won an Oscar. So Winston Duke plays the father in the family, Gabe, and his doppelganger is Abraham. Now, Winston Duke, you'll recognize from Black Panther, but he is great, really great doofus kind of comedy, and that's the great thing about this. Peele has that ability to do the horror and then relieve the tension with some, really organic humor. The kids, Shahadi Wright Joseph plays Zora, who's Umbre, and that's the daughter, and she has a lot more to do in this film, and she's quite good. And Evan Alex plays Jason, and his doppelganger is Pluto, and he's probably the creepiest pairing in a way, probably because he's a little kid. And I just will mention you have Elizabeth Moss and Tim Heidecker. And Elizabeth Moss is just great at everything. Heidecker I didn't know as well. He's on Adult Swim in America and is kind of known for doing you recognize him, you've seen him in stuff, but he's very creepy in the way that he performs his role. So then there's a million other people, but basically that's the core. And I just have to say, the craft on display. So whether you think the film works or not, whether you like the film or not, Peele, the way he uses his camera, there's a shot at the beginning where the family are walking onto the beach and it's shot from above, and you can see them walking in their shadows, walking with them. This isn't a guy who's just setting up the camera. He knows exactly what. I don't know how many films I recognize that he was riffing off. Jaws, especially, but also like The Shining. There's a little bit of an Austrian guy, I always get the name wrong, I think it's Michael Haneke, who did Family Games, and all the scenes in the house have that kind of tension. He really knows what he's doing. The score, I'm not normally a big music guy, but I think the score is absolutely fantastic. So scary and suspenseful. Just generally, this is just a really well-made film. And then the argument is it's incredibly craft-worthy, but does the plot live up to it? And I think the answer is no. It unravels in the third act. But we'll talk a little bit more in spoilers, where I'm going to stick around. If you've seen it, I'm going to explain a lot about what this film is actually saying. Okay, back in a sec. Okay, we're in spoilers. We're going to talk about the ending of Us, but also what is it actually saying? And there's a lot to unravel, and maybe too much. And that might be one of the criticisms that you make of this film, is that it's too packed with ideas. Whereas Get Out had maybe one or two very succinct themes it wanted to talk about and nailed them and kept it contained. This is so ambitious that maybe there's just too many ideas. I feel bad saying that because, there's so much just drivel out there which isn't saying anything, and then to criticize an artist for having too much to say. But there is craft about how you do that. So let's talk about the ending first. So the ending, which has thrown people a little bit, although, I think it's pretty obvious, but I have talked to a few people who weren't quite sure what had happened. So from the beginning, we have the story where Adelaide was lost as a child in a kind of mirror maze and is traumatized by that, and doesn't talk for a long time, and then comes out of it, becomes a dancer and lives her life, and then returns, and that's the beginning of the film. Here she returns, and there's some connection. There's all this weirdness around this beach where she disappeared. We then realized that over the events of the film, that right at the end, that when she disappeared that time, she was kidnapped by her doppelganger, Red, and switched. So that means that all the time where we've been going for Adelaide, that really was the doppelganger, and it kind of changes how you view the whole beginning of the film. Who is the villain? Is there any villain? I don't know. But it definitely means that there's this incredible scene at the end where she's driving away and Jason, her child, looks at her he knows she's the doppelganger, um, but still the doppelganger is his mother. Um, and he's got this great expression on his face. I mean, the acting is fantastic in this film. So, what does that mean for the universal themes that this story is explaining and trying to look at? So, you have this situation in which these people, the tethered, are underground and were created as part of a government experiment to control people above. That they're tethered by using their DNA or whatever, you're never quite sure, that the government agency could then control them. But it turns out it didn't work, and they were abandoned to eat raw rabbits and stuff. It's all a bit crazy, and wear those red jumpsuits. So what that then means is, what is the film saying about the people on top and the people on the bottom? Because I think this film is got a lot to say about America and the world generally, the Western world. So there is a scene, the exposition dump. Some people hate it. I think it was necessary, and I think Nyong'o does a really good job at explaining where she's from. And in it, she goes, we are Americans. And I think what that is explaining is that whether you're on top of the heap or on the bottom, it's a zero-sum game. So if you're winning, someone's losing. Because if you're winning and getting Ubers, someone's driving the Uber. If you're getting food delivered, someone's delivering that food. If you're buying really cheap clothing, someone's making that clothing and they're not getting paid properly for it. And I think this film is exploring that, you know what, the whole world, there's people who are at the bottom and they're not getting to the top. It's not a meritocracy, the game's rigged. So where your emotions ride is, depends on how do you view that. And the film has a real underlying theme of covetousness. I think I wrecked that. To covet, covetousness. And what I mean by that is that means to want other people's stuff. So all through the film, the black family is always talking about how the white family has more stuff. Now, they're doing well, the black family. They got a beach home and they got a boat, but they've got the bad boat. The white family's got the good boat. They got the slightly better house. So there's this theme here that if you want more stuff and you take more stuff, someone's giving up that stuff. And those people aren't getting to the top of the heap. So I think there's a few things going on there, which is really interesting about the state of the world. Now, it's hard not to draw a comparison. I try not to every time see a film through a Trumpian prism, but this film was written while Trump was president, whereas a lot of other films, you kind of think, did the artist see what was coming? Jordan Peele directly wrote this under that. Now, they're wearing red jumpsuits. The red is linked to them. It's very hard to not draw another theme, which is that if you put people down for a long time, which is what often Trump supporters say, that they've been ignored and that they have not been given a chance, that eventually they will revolt and they will rise up from the down, from below, and take power. So I think them wearing red jumpsuits isn't a fluke. You've got to think that Peele's putting something together there. Now, one of the things which has confused a lot of people is how does the tethering work, and why did these people rise up all of a sudden? They seem kind of a bit stupid and not fully formed. And the explanation is that when they do the swap, Adelaide escapes, leaving Red, who is actually the real person. And what happens is that for once, instead of the tethered having this weird relationship where they kind of mimic what's happening above but not very well, and they're not very well coordinated, there's a scene in which Red and Adelaide dance in unison, fully coordinated, beautifully dancing. And what happens is the Tethered see that and realize that this person is different. This person has some sort of fully formed soul, which they talk about in the film, compared to all of them. And so she becomes the leader of this revolution because she wants to get back up to the surface. She wants what was taken from her. And she starts that revolution. It's not very clear. I think if you're not into film, it'd be hard to maybe put all that together. But that's what triggers the revolution. And because of that, everything which was in her head in 1986, including the Hands Across the Nation, all that kind of stuff, that's where it all comes from. And she then, leads this army up. Now, where they all got 1 million gold scissors, sometimes you just got to let things go, I guess. The other interesting thing, I think, is if you think about that she's wearing a Thriller t-shirt. Now, I remember, I'm so old that I saw Thriller when it was it was a big thing. Like at night, there was a TV show that Michael Jackson was going to release his new song, and there was going to be like this 12-minute film clip, and everyone stayed home. It was like watching Game of Thrones nowadays. Now in Thriller, if you remember the clip, Michael Jackson is with his date and she thinks it's all normal, and they go out and these monsters attack, and just at the crux when it's all scary, she turns and he has become a monster. He was always one of them, and he gives this weird look. Now if you think about us, that is exactly what happens with Adelaide, and that look at the end of the film is, I think, a nod to Michael Jackson, who was always this dual person, a monster, maybe even too real a monster, and then his public persona. I just think Peele is just doing so much with it. This really is almost a lot of the posters are ink blots, like we call them in psychology, Rorschach tests. And that is where you give them to someone and they can be interpreted in any way, but they show your, what you're unconsciously thinking, your subconscious is thinking. And so this is like a Rorschach test. You can watch this film and whatever you're thinking will come out, because there's so many ways you can interpret it. It's just it's the difference between content and art. Content can even be better. It can be just a really good action film and it's just great, like Die Hard, let's say. But art is designed to make you think, and it's designed to make you question you, yourself, your family, your society in which you live in. And that's what Jordan Peele's doing. This is art. And even though I don't think it's completely successful, because I do think if you set up rules for a universe, then the rules have to work. And I think by the third act, some of those rules aren't working. This is a great film. I think everyone should see it. I think it's really interesting. And I think you'll have a completely different reaction probably to what I have. But however you see it will say a lot about yourself. You'll be looking in the mirror. That's it for today. I'll be back with more stuff. If you like what I'm doing, press like. If you hit the bell, you'll always know when I've got new stuff. And I'm on Twitter, @Guru Eden, and I'll talk to you soon.